Hi, my name is Savannah Ridenauer, and I'm going to be going over The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. Just so we can have a little bit of background information on Kate Chopin. She was born in 1850, and she lived until 1904. She was in a marriage where she did love her husband, but however, he died of malaria in 1882, and she found herself a single mother of 6 children who she raised on her own from then on out. She never remarried. Through her time, Kate Chopin is regaled as a breakthrough writer because she wrote about passion in her fictional stories. Now, the interesting part is that she was one of the first writers to really base the whole purpose of a fictional story off of passion, with passion as its setting, as its baseline for the story, which wasn't really done back then. Her stories now are considered a revolt against societal rules during the era. She is also considered a feminist writer whose main goal was to capture not only the female perspective in her writing, but the female desire for more. So it really took about 10 years before anybody caught on to what Chopin was doing. She was published in Vogue and a lot of illustrious magazines, and she'd written over 100 short stories and several books, but nobody had really seen until a decade of her writing had been published that, wait a minute, Chopin is writing about the female perspective, about female dreams, about female longing, and the repression of the female self. And she's basing a lot of her stories off of the female desire for more. And this is kind of where she comes into her own as a revolutionary, because it wasn't time. Now, there's also The Story of an Hour was published in 1894. When we first read it, it appears just to be about a woman who learns of her husband's death. She visualizes her freedom and dies from a heart attack when she learns that he's alive. Our protagonist of the story is Mrs. Mallard, or I should say the main character in the story is Mrs. Mallard. And at first, Mrs. Mallard is depicted as a subservient woman who has stayed in a loveless marriage for society's sake. However, she has dreams of her own freedom. So, while she's not able to act out on these dreams, this kind of incorporates her into the box that we're familiar with seeing women during this time. She dreams of her own freedoms, but she's not able to act them out because she is trapped in a marriage to a man. When we dig a little bit deeper into the story, we're going to start with the quote from when she first heard the news of her husband's passing. She did not hear the story as many women have heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. She wept at once, with sudden, wild abandonment in her sister's arms. At first, when I read this, I thought that Mrs. Mallard was very grief-stricken. I thought that she was heartbroken that her husband was dead. However, after reading her internalized thoughts about her freedom and her dreams and her passion to have her own goals, I read that paragraph with a different light. I really envisioned it as her trying to act out what she thought would be the appropriate response for a woman who had just heard that her husband's dying. She's trying to fit societal norms, which is why she has to excuse herself, lock herself in a room before she can really truly express how she really feels. And then we see that in the next paragraphs. This is just an excerpt of when she's expressing, or when she's allowing herself to realize that freedom is possible and real for her. When she abandoned herself a little, whispered word escaped her slightly parted lips. She said it over and over under the breath. Free, free, free. And here she's finally coming to terms with the fact that she is free, that she has freedom. And at first she's afraid of the idea because she's not used to it, but she quickly warms up to the idea. She quickly warms up to the fact that her life is now going to be her own. It's not going to be beholden to a man. And the very final line of the story is that she's experienced her fear, she has embraced her freedom, she's coming down the stairs, she's full of triumph, and she sees her husband walk into the door. When the doctors came, they said she had died of heart disease, of the joy that kills. And I really feel like that can be interpreted 2 ways. The first way it can really be interpreted is that they mistook her sadness or her grief for joy. They see that her husband is home and she's so overjoyed that her husband is alive because she acted appropriately and was sad and crying when she learned of his death, that they think she was so happy when he walked through the door that she died of that happiness. I also interpreted in the way that she was so happy with her freedom. It was finally in her grasp. She visualized it. And when he walked through the door, all of that joy, all of that happiness that she had allowed to build up within herself was snatched away. And that snatching away of that joy was what killed her. And that's just how I interpreted that particular scene. So the story of an hour is set in a time during, and it was written during time where women did not have a lot of their own freedom. Mrs. Mallard, our protagonist, really is presented within societal norms. You know, she's married, which is expected of women her age during the time, but she's in a loveless marriage and she feels trapped. Her own dreams are repressed. So, you know, and I feel like where Kate Chopin really drives home her stereotype is that even though she dreams of her own freedom, even though she has her own longings, she's still playing the role that society has carved for her. She's still crying in public because she thinks that's what she needs to do for her husband. You know, she has to lock herself away in a room to really express her own joy at being free. But she does break the stereotype because we do read Mrs. Mallard as a strong-willed woman who has dreams. She's overjoyed at her husband's death, which is not typical of what you would expect for a woman who believes that her world begins and ends with her husband. So, I mean, I really do think she breaks the stereotype. She does engender some of the societal norms that are carved out for her during that time, but she's also strong. She has a mind, and she has her own thought and her own passions and dreams. What could love, the unsolved mystery, count for in the face of this possession of self-assertion which she suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being? I feel like the story of an hour has a lot of correlations with Chopin's own life. Yes, she did love her husband, and it's unfortunate that he died, but in the same way, Chopin got to live out her own dreams and run the family business, and I feel like though the repression of that dreams is what is represented in the story of an hour. Can you imagine if Chopin did not be allowed to express herself? I think that there'd be a lot of similarities between Chopin and Mrs. Mallard. Thank you.